Thank you all again, everyone, for joining us today for our Friday forum. As Amber said, our topic today is about food sales tax. As you may or may not know, sales tax in general is some of the most regressive forms of tax that there is. It disproportionately affects those with lower incomes more than those who have higher incomes. And food specifically being a human right of individuals to have access to healthy and nutritious food, having high sales tax for those products disproportionately impacts those who have a lower income. So way back in 1999, Empower Missouri, at that time known as the Missouri Association for Social Welfare, and our Hunger Task Force at the time, worked with the state legislature to pass a bill that lowered the sales tax on the state sales tax on food to 4.225. That is lower than just the general state sales tax on other items. And then this issue had come up again because of some social media that actually was going around about what Kansas was doing. They were looking to completely eliminate their food sales tax in that state. And it kind of brought up some conversations of here in Missouri if we might be able to do the same thing. So we wanted to kind of explore this opportunity and possibility for here in Missouri, which has led us today to today's forum, where we have two speakers that are going to talk a little bit more about that possibility. One that's going to talk about what's happening in Kansas, our neighbor to the west, as well as someone who's going to talk a little bit about it from here in the Missouri perspective and how it's a little bit more complicated for us here in Missouri to completely eliminate that state sales tax. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. They're going to do some presentations about the topic from their perspective, and then we can have some further discussions about the issue. So first up, we have Haley Kottler. She is the Thriving Campaign Director at Kansas Appleseed. They are the overseeing organization that does a lot of anti-hunger advocacy and economic justice work. She is currently leading the work around protecting SNAP food assistance, as well as working on expanding child nutrition programs in the state of Kansas. She engages with Kansans all across the state on anti-hunger advocacy and conducting and building grassroots campaigns. She and her fight for justice is rooted in a devotion to equity and fairness for all. And she studied at Kansas State University and dual majored in family studies and human services, as well as gender, women, and sexuality studies. So we welcome Haley today. And our other speaker we have is Gina Aitch. She is a policy analyst with the Missouri Budget Project. And there she advocates for state budget, tax policies, and social safety net programs that advance the well-being of Missourians with low and moderate incomes. Her work primarily focuses on the state-administered food and economic security programs. So she completed her Master's of Social Work from the University of Missouri at St. Louis, where she specialized in leadership and social change. She also served as a graduate research assistant while she was there. So we are happy to have both of them speak with us today, and I believe that Haley is going to start us off, and Amber is going to share her screen with some slides that Haley has prepared. So welcome. Thanks, Haley.
Sure thing. Thanks, Christine. Thank you all so much for having me today. I see some of my colleagues in Kansas on the call who honestly could talk about this probably better than I can. So Karen and Andrea, it's good to see you. We just had our meeting earlier today. But again, my name's Haley Kottler. I'm a campaign director at Kansas Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. You can go to the next slide. And at Kansas Appleseed, we really believe that working together, we can build a state full of thriving, inclusive, and just communities. So we have 3 campaigns currently. One is our Just campaign. We believe all Kansans should benefit from fair and effective systems of justice. This really is all of our juvenile and criminal justice work. And then we also do a lot of child welfare through this work. So if you probably are familiar, but Kansas in the last, for a long time, the foster care system has been in crisis. So we've done a lot of work on that. On our inclusive campaign, we believe all Kansans should participate fully in their communities And so this is really our voter engagement piece of the work. Currently, we've been spending a lot of time in Southeast Kansas, which is one of the most, it's the highest poverty place or region in Kansas. So we've been doing a lot of voter engagement work down there with my colleague, Caleb Smith. And then Thriving Campaign, which is the campaign that I am very privileged to get to work on. We believe that all Kansans deserve access to affordable food, safe and secure housing, and a hopeful future. So currently we are working on mostly SNAP food assistance advocacy, and then child nutrition programs such as summer food service program, after school meals, things like that. If you all can imagine, there are constantly attacks on SNAP legislatively in Kansas. So we've been doing a lot of work around that this year, and shout out to my colleague Karen on the call, who I think we've been on the phone every single day this session about something. So you can go to the next slide. So Kansas has the second highest food sales tax in the nation. This has been talked about for years and years in Kansas, that we need to end and eliminate the food sales tax, but it just never has happened for one reason or another. Additionally, it's really only one of 7 states in the country that fully taxes groceries, and it's currently at a 6.5% food sales tax. We really do believe that this will be a necessary boost to Kansans. We know that it won't eliminate food insecurity in Kansas, but that it will help all Kansans have a little bit more food money in their pockets to buy food. Next slide, please. So today I really just wanted to talk about what I have seen has worked and maybe what hasn't worked in Kansas. I will say it has been a hard couple months, 4 months, 5 months since we've rolled this out. You know, the initial rollout was amazing. There was also the governor's office had the initial rollout, and there was tons of energy behind it. We felt really prepared at Kansas Appleseed to go out on the fight ahead in the legislature. We had a social media toolkit, we had graphics, we had talking points, we had it all at the beginning. Additionally, yeah, it spilled over to Missouri is what it sounds like, which is wonderful. It was really, really great. And I'll say that everyone I knew was talking about it. I have a life outside of progressive nonprofit spaces, and I like ride horses and stuff. So I'm around a lot of cowboys and, you know, more rural folks. And they don't typically talk about politics, right? We don't get into that stuff. We just ride our horses. But this was being talked about at all these events, and I loved it because it was really a bipartisan, is that the right word? Kansans were really, really energized about this. Additionally, we were coordinating, we have coordinated between nonprofits and other advocates in this space, which has been really nice. There's, I think, 4 or 5 organizations, and we connect every week on axing the food sales tax in Kansas. And that's been really nice because sometimes on these issues, it feels like we just go out and do it on our own, or we just 2 organizations working together. It really has been nice to work with organizations that aren't just, you know, an anti-poverty organization to try and get this done. And then additionally, at Kansas Appleseed, we have been putting pressure on legislators from constituents through emails, phone, and in-person visits. We got some money to get that done, thankfully. We also did targeted digital ads. And also we felt that was pretty effective. I think we had in a 10 day to 2 week time period, I think we had 350 people email their legislators. We can't track phone calls, but we did track emails. And then we also got a lot of energy behind the targeted ads. There was a lot of conversation on Facebook about axing the food sales tax, and as some of you all on the call today know, sometimes when you are doing paid digital as a progressive organization, it can get a little bit heated on Facebook. But this really wasn't. So that was really exciting. And I'll also say, we were also hearing back from advocates and Kansans across the state that when they were calling their legislators, they were actually getting responses back. So there were a couple legislators who were in leadership, and then another who chairs the Senate Tax Committee was actually responding to Kansans when they were calling. Unfortunately, it looked a little bit like, I really do want this, but I'm getting pressure leadership, or I'm getting pressure from other people, so we can't do it. But it was really exciting for us because, again, as many know on this call, sometimes you just make phone calls and emails and you never hear anything back. So we were hearing back on this. Next slide. So what hasn't worked, and this is just my perspective, this isn't across the board, I'll just say from Kansas Appleseed, and if my colleagues at other organizations want to chime in, you definitely should. But really what has happened is there was such an amazing initial rollout that I have found that many Kansans just believe or are assuming that ending the food sales tax has already happened or will happen this legislative session. So I was actually just saying in another call earlier today that I had someone reach out and was like, why the heck am I still getting taxed on my grocery bill? And so that was a hard conversation, you know, because the process, the democratic process, our legislative process, folks are really disillusioned by it, right? Because there was so much energy around this. There was support from our Democratic governor. There was a lot of support from the leading Republican gubernatorial candidate as well. Everyone has been talking about ending the food sales tax, and yet our legislative leadership is just kind of sitting on their hands with a full elimination. Additionally, there's kind of been some unclear and conflicting outlooks on Kansas's financial future. This is probably where I should say I am not a tax expert. I am an anti-hunger advocate, so I can't get into tax policy. My eyes kind of glaze over, but there's there's been different projections on what will happen with food sales tax, and they don't all look the same, which has been confusing for, in my experience, it's been very confusing for advocates. Additionally, when working in coalitions, really everyone has different goals and everyone has different angles. And so, we had a time here where not all of us in the coalition have always been in agreement on should this be a full repeal or should this be, a tempered down repeal of the food sales tax. So I just want to name that like it's hard working in coalitions too. Everyone is coming from different priorities, and for myself and for our organization, we are an anti-hunger, anti-poverty organization. And so we want to put as much food on people's tables as we can as possible. And so for us, that has looked like a full repeal immediately. For other organizations, it's looked a lot different. So just wanted to name that. Next slide. We're here. Currently, the Kansas legislature is recessed until next couple weeks. So we'll be picking back up for the last couple weeks of legislative sessions and then advocates are continuing to urge legislators for a repeal of the food sales tax in Kansas. I highlighted full, but things have changed since I've created this PowerPoint. So we are continuing to urge legislators, and we are all really buckling down to see how that can happen. Again, there's a lot of fatigue, and it has lost its steam over the last couple months. So we're just kind of doing everything that we can to try and continue to put energy and pressure on legislators to repeal the food sales tax in Kansas. That's all I had for my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, not a tax policy expert, so if you ask me about some of the nitty gritty in this, I probably can't answer it, but yeah.
Does anyone have any questions for Haley right now, or we can hear from our next panelist and then do a fuller kind of discussion at the end? But if there's anything, any clarifying questions or anything specifically for Haley right now, we can be sure to take that, or you can put it in the chat as well.
This is Karen, and I apologize if Haley mentioned this already. I have kids home today, so I've been in and out, them getting my attention. But I just wanted to call out the work that Casey Healthy Kids has been doing on the food sales tax for the last 7 years, I think. This is not new this year. Part of the reason everyone assumes it's already been done is because they really put the food sales tax into the middle of a tax conversation. When all the tax cuts were happening during the Brownback administration a number of years ago, and sort of bringing attention to that. So I think the only reason we're able to get to where we are now is 7 years of hard work. And I know that's hard for advocates to hear too, but there was a lot of build up to this and a lot of important resources and research they did. They had white papers on the impact on grocers and the impact on low-income folks, just all kinds of different things that gave us all the tools that we needed to be able to advance this to this point. So I just want to recognize that important work that they've done.
Karen, I think you're 1,000% totally, like, honestly, the last 7 years, I haven't been around that long in this space, but Casey Healthy Kids has been doing incredible work. And I want to uplift the part about grocers. Like, there was a lot of energy this year about tapping into the effects on rural grocers, and I think that made a difference when talking to legislators and talking to others about this, because when folks heard grocers and rural grocers, the red flag went off.
All right, Gina, do you want to talk from the Missouri perspective, and then we can kind of compare notes and have a further discussion after that?
Sure. Great. So yeah, as Christine already mentioned on Policy Analysis with Missouri Budget Project, we analyze the state budget and tax policy. We really focus on policies and programs that provide opportunities for Missourians with low and moderate incomes. So go ahead, next slide. Thank you. I am going to take the next couple of minutes to get into the weeds here, so please forgive me. But it'll help lay the groundwork for the rest of this conversation. So the Missouri state sales tax is 4.225%. I should say the sales tax rate is 4.225%. Now, local governments, of course, can charge a additional sales tax in addition to that, but we're going to be talking about the state portion. So of that 4.225%, 3% goes to general revenue, 1% goes to schools, and then the remaining 0.225% is divided between the Department of Natural Resources and Department of Conservation. Now, as Christine mentioned, we only have a partial sales tax on food, and that is because food is exempt from that 3% that goes to general revenue. So also I should mention that in Missouri, in this particular case, food is defined as food that can be purchased with food stamps. So that's going to be most foods, but does exclude prepared foods. Now, the 0.225% that goes to natural resources and conservation, those are constitutional amendments. So those are going to be much more difficult to change. So lawmakers tend to focus on that 1% sales tax that goes to school because they're able to change that. And as a matter of fact, we do have a couple of bills that have been proposed. One has gotten pretty far this year. But we'll talk a little bit more about why that ran into a snag. But for the purposes of this presentation, when we talk about eliminating the food sales tax, we're talking about that 1% that goes towards schools. So, and I'll be coming back to that, but for now we are out of the weeds. So next slide, please. So Missouri has an upside down tax system. And what I mean by that is families earning less tend to pay more in state and local taxes than families with higher incomes. So a family earning about $10,000 a year pays close to 10% of their income in taxes, whereas the top 1% highest earning income earners, they only pay about 6% of their income in taxes. So providing tax relief for these families is one way we can help them afford their basic necessities. Eliminating that state 1% sales tax on food can help families with low and middle income save around $30 to up to $75 a year, which may not seem like a lot, but that's enough to, help feed someone for a week, help buy diapers, or even help pay for utilities. So next slide. So as I previously mentioned, I'm not sure what happened with that puppy. There is a tiny snag, and by tiny I mean really big, eliminating the sales tax on food, because as mentioned, it goes toward helping to fund our schools, which is another important thing. Missouri's 1% sales tax for schools is commonly referred to as Proposition C. And this was approved by Missouri voters in the early 1980s. The selling point of Prop C was that in exchange for the sales tax increase, Missourians would receive property tax relief. So as a side note, Missouri schools, as many of you may know, get a large share of their funding from local property taxes. We do have a primer on that. I think Amber's going to put a link to that in the chat. So if you're interested in learning more about how schools are funded in Missouri, you can take a look at that. So Proposition C has two major components that are most relevant to this conversation. One is a 1% state sales tax that is distributed to schools on a per pupil basis. So that 1% state sales tax, it gets deposited into the state school district trust fund until it then gets distributed to schools. And schools then have to reduce taxes, property taxes, by half the revenue schools receive from that tax. So state sales tax goes in a school district trust fund. Then from there, it goes to schools. Schools have to reduce their property tax. Now, there's two things to note about this. Prop C is not just about a tax on food. The 1% tax applies to a number of items. So Prop C generated close to $1 billion for schools in fiscal year 2021, and about 18% of that came from food sales. And we estimate, Missouri Budget Project estimate that amount to be about $175 million. So that's a lot of money that schools could lose out on. The second thing to know is that voters of a school district can waive the Prop C property tax reduction. And about 90% of school districts in Missouri either have a full or partial waiver of the property tax reduction. So although the most obvious and probably the greatest impact of eliminating the food sales tax will be felt by schools. I do think that property tax provision was worth noting. So all of this is to say that if we get rid of the food sales tax, we will need to find some way to replace that lost revenue. Next slide. And Missouri Budget Project is recommending closing the LLC loophole and then using the revenue generated from that to fund our schools. So the LLC loophole was created by Senate Bill 509 in 2014. When it is fully implemented, it will allow certain businesses, not all business, but certain businesses like LLCs that file their taxes through the individual income tax structure. It will allow them to exclude up to 20% of their income from taxes. Now, research has shown that this type of loophole increases the number of registered LLCs. However, it tends not to increase the number of jobs or stimulate the economy. This makes it even more unfair that these special types of business get a huge income tax break that regular folks like you and I do not get. And I believe Kansas several years ago, they created an LLC loophole, but eventually ended up having to close it because of all the lost revenue from it. So closing the LLC loophole will generate about $200 million in tax revenue, which would be enough to replace the revenue schools would lose if we got rid of the Prop C food sales tax. And the next slide you'll see a comparison of the tax savings from the LLC loophole. So at the top is what folks would save once the LLC loophole is fully implemented at that 20%. And as you can see here, nearly all the benefit goes to the top 20%, and much of that goes to the top 1% who would, so someone earning around $1 million will get a tax savings of about $4,000. Now, if you compare that to what eliminating the sales tax will look like, so you look there at the bottom grid in red, you can see that the benefits of eliminating the food sales tax are much more broadly distributed across income groups. So the yellow in what's highlighted in yellow there, that's the tax savings. So if you were to simultaneously, if you were to get rid or close the LLC loophole and also get rid of the food sales tax, you can see that the only group is that top 20% high income earners. Those are the only folks that would see potentially a net increase in taxes. And at that, it would be a very small amount. So summing it all up, eliminating that 1% sales tax on food, it is doable, but we'll need to replace that lost revenue, and closing that LLC loophole is one way to do that. And then the next slide, I think that's just my contact information. Yeah, so our website, mobudget.org, there's my contact.
There's a question on it.
We do have a fact sheet on the LLC loophole, by the way, and I'll throw that in there for y'all.
And there's a question kind of following up with that, Gina, about the Hancock Amendment. It says closing that loophole, would that get around the Hancock Amendment? Could you address that a little bit?
Sure. Put this in the link real quick. Okay, so I just put a link to the loophole fact sheet. Okay, so the Hancock Amendment, for those of you who do not know, there's two parts to it, but in this particular case, the one that we're most interested in is that lawmakers are limited by how much revenue they can raise in a year. So in this particular case, because we are offsetting, so yes, we are reducing by eliminating that sales tax, we are reducing revenue, but it's an offset of a nearly equal amount. So that would not, so you would not see a net increase in revenue. So this should not harm that or get us in trouble with the Hancock limit. And please let me know if that was not clear.
Yeah, thank you, Gina. So I know at the beginning of legislative session, so right when filing had happened, there was lots of social media presence about this happening in Kansas. And I know some legislators on the Missouri side started having kind of a back and forth on social media about this and how great idea this would be for Missouri. And it sounds like it would be, so many legislators want to, reduce taxes and too many taxes. And this was a great way to do that. But as you can see, it's a little bit more complicated. So right when this idea came out, I think advocates as well as legislators on both sides of the aisle really thought that this may be something that we could all kind of coalesce around and talk about as a real savings for those who have low incomes. But it was not as easy as just passing a bill to eliminate that. I know, with the budget that we are in a surplus right now with a lot of the COVID additional monies that are coming into the state. So having those additional funds, I think was part of the reason why Kansas was pushing it. And then inadvertently Missouri doing the same thing. But having that specific tax that's not very much, but is a lot of money that goes directly to schools made the conversation a lot more complicated. So it was not as simple as just filing a bill, getting votes on it and passing it and being like, great, no more sales tax on food. But having those kind of intricacies of, those specific constitutional amendments for conservation, which are much more complicated to get rid of than just the legislature saying so, or this rest of the money going specifically to schools, because as advocates and progressive advocates, we also don't want to be supporting stuff that's taking money away from our schools, right? That's something that we also want to be supporting and increasing financial support of. Which kind of leads us to where we are right now, having this bill, specifically House Bill 1992 from Representative Mary Elizabeth Coleman, which was the bill that was kind of moving on it, kind of at a place now as advocates saying, okay, maybe we can't really support this the way that it is because of all of these, other factors, which made it just a little bit more complicated from an advocate's perspective right now. So does anyone have any specific questions, kind of what Kansas is, what they're doing, and where Missouri stands and what we're doing moving forward? We'd be happy to take any other questions. I kind of have a follow-up question for Haley. So I know that the governor was really gung-ho about it. It seemed like there was a lot of movement. Can you talk to kind of why it has stalled in your legislature? Because it seemed like it was moving so quickly and there was a really good push for it. And now, it seems like it's gotten more complicated in Kansas as well, which I guess assume most legislation does get complicated and as it moves through the process.
Yeah, I think my colleagues on this call could probably speak to this better than I can, but I think it's been dragging on because it's an election year, and two, I think everyone doesn't want each other to get the win. Everyone wants to get the win. They don't want everyone else to get the win. And so we have bipartisan legislators who are ready to get this done, but leadership continues to put cogs in the wheel, and I'll say this is not the only issue that they do that with, right? But this one was obviously the biggest topic this year. So Karen and Andrea, I don't know if you have anything else, but yeah.
One thing that has slowed some things down, they're waiting for not just budget projections, but seeing if the record-breaking surpluses in the budget projections actually came true. And seeing, is this just a bump from, federal COVID relief hitting the state, or is it a surplus that's sustainable that we can expect to continue for the next few years? And then another thing that's put kind of a kink in the process is that when Panasonic and their mega project came along, the state has dedicated, what is it, like $1.5 billion to incentives for that mega development. So if they announce that they're coming to Kansas, that's $1.5 billion that the state can't include in the budget. If they say, no, we're going to Oklahoma, then that completely changes things. And for 2 months, they've been saying, we expect a decision any day now. So that's kind of put a damper on certain things. But then you see the tax committees also passing through tax relief bills for other groups of people. But with the sales tax on food, they've been really conservative about it and saying, we want to make sure that this isn't too drastic of a cut, too fast. Is it sustainable? Which again, they didn't say that about the Panasonic deal, and they didn't say that about other tax relief bills. So sure, some of it is political, but there have been some hiccups along the way. And there were about 6 to 8 bills at one point. So within tax committees, they had to hammer out the details and come to compromises on differences. And then the House and Senate tax committees, their bills were drastically different. So they had to come to agreements as well. So some of that is just the compromising takes some time. It still should happen during the veto session. So we're not at a time yet, but it has been a complicated process.
Gina, on the Missouri side, is there a bill that is addressing that LLC loophole? And if so, where is that in the process?
I don't think so. This was something in our conversations with here amongst us, our organization, since this whole thing came about, and we got the analysis done, and like, oops, that's going to schools. So what can we do? Yeah. And Jeremy, he sits in our staff meeting, so he's aware of that as well, about possibly doing an LLC loophole. So I think this is the first time we've made that public. Now there are, I know there was one, and they haven't gone anywhere. Obviously, they haven't gone as far as the one that you have mentioned, Christine. But Representative Wyndham, I think his was proposing estate tax or inheritance tax, and then someone else had one, an income tax on owners of foreign owners of agricultural businesses in Missouri. So even those are, trying to figure out some way to offset that loss.
Yeah, that's correct. So the bill that has been moving the furthest, that House Bill 1992 by Representative Mary Elizabeth Coleman, she's a member of the Republican Party, the majority party in the state of Missouri, did not have any offsets, right? It was just eliminating the tax. And she told us flat out that she would not add anything into a bill that would increase the taxes any other way, which is kind of the mantra of some Republicans of, ending, lessening sales tax burdens on anything, not increasing anything. So that bill has moved the furthest. As Gina said, there are a few other bills that from Democrat, minority party sponsors who also see the benefit of ending or reducing the schools or the food sales tax, but they had offsets directly within their bill that would offset the lost revenue from the sales tax by increasing taxes otherwise, an estate sales tax, a sales tax on foreign owned farmland. Other ways to kind of look at that, really understanding that decreasing it for the lowest the most regressive taxes, lowering that, but increasing it other ways, were all directly in that one bill. But I don't believe any of those have even had a committee hearing.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Christine, it looks like we have a question from Joshua. Joshua, if you want to unmute or drop your question in the chat so we can get that answered for you.
Either way, I was just asking because we said that this sales tax would be on anything that you can buy with SNAP funds, EB with food stamps. Is there a way that we can incentivize some of that healthy eating so people aren't still, I mean, a lot of people, you know, when they limit, they get what's high in preservatives and stuff that is potentially not the healthiest food items. Is there a way to incentivize that with this bill, or?
Like reducing the sales tax on certain sorts of foods? Is that what you're saying?
Potentially, like
Yeah.
you have a lower sale, like on like, you know, soda, you know, that's opposed to like fresh or frozen vegetables. Is that?
There was conversation in that committee by some of the legislators on that committee to limit that bill to just foods that are served through the WIC program, which is a limited amount of and types of food that you can buy. So the WIC program is the Women, Infants, and Children program, which is focused on foods for women, pregnant women, and their, you know, small children. And the foods that are underneath that program are limited, right? So SNAP, the food stamps program, pretty much any unprepared food can be purchased that way. WIC is limited with specific types of foods and amounts of foods in that. So there was some discussion in the committee to limit that reduction of sales tax for those foods specifically. That would not only, you know, limit the food choice, but also limit the amount of sales tax decrease that would be possible, right? Because it'd be less food purchased under that new sales tax rate. So that was a way to kind of decrease the amount of taxes lost on the state level. They were discussing about adding that as an amendment, but I don't think they ended up doing that with the bill that ended up passing, but that was a conversation that they were having.
So is that something that would be, I work in Lincoln Nutrition, so I'm kind of, so is that something that you think would be a net positive for the health and health of the people that are using these programs? Or do you think that would limit of food choice would be kind of a negative, or is it kind of a double-edged sword there?
Yeah, I mean, Empower Missouri specifically has never been an advocate for limiting food choice. That having that capability for individuals to make their own nutritional choices based on what they need for their family has always been kind of the talking point that we use. WIC is a different beast where they have those specific limits on that. But in terms of SNAP and, you know, the use of that, we always advocate for, you know, the opportunity to have food choice based on your own individual needs. And I don't think, you know, limiting that would really offset the cost burden for the individuals that would be saving those taxes. So we have never advocated for limiting food choice.
Yeah, and SNAP is a federal program, so it's known what foods, and a lot of grocers are set up to identify what foods are SNAP, right? So that makes it pretty easy for grocers to get on board. And I think someone put a comment on that because they have to set up their systems, be able to recognize those foods. And SNAP is a federal government. I think Andrew's put something in there as well. So that's a requirement. And so that makes it easy for here in Missouri to say, okay, SNAP foods, you know, those are what we can easily recognize, acknowledge, and, you know, group into that sales tax reduction area. And like Kristen said, I'm really not big on limiting food choice. And when it does come to a situation where certain people, you know, some of the foods they buy, well, I mean, is it their fault that those foods are the cheapest, the one that they can make their dollar work for them? You know, yeah, I'm not really big on limiting people's choices. There's a lot of people who make a lot more money that don't eat well and make that food happen.
I was thinking more, I guess I kind of frame that as kind of, I guess the impact of my question wasn't my intent. It's like, is there a way to make it more friendly per cost wise, or some way to make it where they're able to actually spend that extra money, spend that extra money on, fresh produce or stuff that is somehow less healthier for them, opposed to having to always go and have to rely on that cheapest dollar, cheapest option to spread.
Yeah, and I was thinking the same thing as Andrea put in. That's more of a way to incentivize purchasing of healthy foods by giving them more dollars to spend on those. So like locally grown fresh fruits and vegetables would be like this double up food bucks, where you have a certain amount of SNAP dollars that you get on your card, but you can get double that for fruits, vegetables, other sorts of healthy food items, which would
I see what you say.
cost. Yeah, there is opportunity for that with SNAP benefits directly. I'm not sure that translates into the lowering of the sales taxes necessarily, but that double up food bucks program is a way to kind of address that, differential in food costs for healthy foods to, processed cheaply made foods.
Is the
We
double
did
up
see
food
that.
bucks program, is that kind of standard, or is there like information that you can get? You have to enroll in that for some of our people?
We have a limited number of, and correct me if someone on the call knows, but we have the last time I looked into it, a limited number of people who even offer that in Missouri.
It's a nonprofit philanthropic thing. So they have to get philanthropic funding to match those dollars. And then they have to get that set up, the systems set up with the grocery store or the farmer's market or whatever. And so it's quite complex, and it's not like SNAP, they don't do that in the SNAP program. It's a separate philanthropic effort on the side.
But what we do have is we have like WIC farmers market programs and senior farmers market programs, which would provide, additional funding for WIC participants and seniors to purchase more healthy, locally grown food, which is another way.
One thing I wanted to point out from some of the conversations that we had on the Kansas side when these issues came up about just doing healthy food. I'm talking about the WIC program. The WIC program is designed for pregnant and nursing moms and their children under 5. That does not have the same nutritional needs as a diabetic senior citizen. So even when you're saying like, okay, it's whole milk, or what if someone has a milk allergy, they can't get a tax break on their almond milk, even though that's all they can drink. It's only, so there's those kinds of things. And then the whole issue of how you define healthy is a sticky wicket. And there are approximately 30,000, between 20 and 30,000 new food products that are introduced every year. So someone at the state is going to have to go through that list and say what applies and what doesn't. And even if you just say fresh fruits and vegetables, well, what if there's no option but, a convenience store, but that convenience store has canned peas, or canned peas not as good as, or frozen peas. So you get, once you start down that road, it gets really gray really quickly. So we just wanted a blanket think that it's all food, not prepared food. That's an easier line to, I think, make. And people already make that for SNAP, that, not prepared food like deli food or restaurant foods, but any other food in the grocery store. Again, once you start down that road, you see how tricky it is.
I think another thing is that we are really not helping families if we send healthy foods, because that's the most expensive food. So they are losing by having to buy the healthy food if it gets to be that thing of limitations. So we're, helping them on one hand eating healthy, but they having less money to buy food with because the healthy food is more expensive.
I'm just going to interject here for a second because we're coming up on the end of our scheduled time. Definitely, this has been a great conversation and keep having it. But I did want to mention that I'm going to drop a link for our participant survey into the chat here. We want to make sure that these Friday forums are providing you guys with good, helpful information. So filling this out really helps us do that. I just put that in the chat. And then I also want to invite everybody to sign up for our May Friday forum. That one will be held on May 20th. and it is right after the end of Missouri's legislative session. So that is going to be the topic. You'll hear from some of our policy team about this session. And I'll put the link where you can sign up for that in the chat too. So that is all I have. And if anyone else has any additional questions, please feel free to chime in now.
The only other announcement I have is that we are able to offer continuing ed credits for social workers. So if you are in need or interested in getting a certificate for the hour forum that we had, you'll need to send me an email with your name and your email and your mailing address and your last 4 digits of your social security number, and I can get that certificate to you. I will put my email in the chat. Thank you, Nisha. She put it in there for me. Anyone have any other final questions or comments before we do end today? All right, seeing none. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I really hope you have a fabulous weekend. And if you are interested in any of these topics, we do organize a food security coalition that meets every other Friday. Our next one will be on April 22nd. All the details about that meeting will be on our website at empowermissouri.org, or you feel free to shoot me an email and I'm happy to talk with you more about the work of our coalition. Thank you all.